Well, a very warm welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed lunch, and I hope you're braced for the afternoon session of the Talk Money conference. Just a reminder, we've got our calls to action up there, all 5 of them. Do take a chance to read, absorb, and think how you can make those happen in life outside of these 4 walls. I say it's the Talk Money conference, but it actually feels we've missold you on this, because we shouldn't be saying talk money, but increasingly should we be saying talking data and AI, because the face of money, borrowing, saving, and debt is changing beyond belief. Now, how does all of this affect our ability to manage our money and to help others manage their money? Well, I'm pleased to say our next keynote speaker is, I think we should actually term him the disruptor in chief, because he's here to tell us about why what we have been doing may not be the right thing. The world is being disrupted. Maybe we need to change our thinking too. Kenneth Cukier is the senior editor at The Economist. He's host of its weekly podcast on technology, and he's the co-author of Big Data, which is a New York Times bestseller, and he's got plenty of other roles beside that. So I'd like to give Kenneth a very warm welcome to the stage to join us now. Kenneth, over to you. He is here, really.
Hello, and thank you. I apologize. It took me a long time to get out from behind the stage. I'm going to use it as a shield in case what I have to say is something that you don't want to hear. Lunch is over. You've not brought food into the auditorium, so I have to look out for tomatoes being peeled at me and thrown at me. However, I want to start first by asking a question. Not because I like to ask questions, but because I like data. I like data so much that everywhere I go, I have to collect some more of it. What I want to know is who here feels like data revolution, yeah, it's going to be amazing, transform the world, transform my industry, raise your hand. And then the others are going to be who thinks data revolution, hyped, not that important, and I'm a bit cynical. Who has drunken from the Kool-Aid? All in favor of data, raise your hand. Okay, that's not bad. That looks like about 51.3% of you. Who of you feels like data? Not really. I think it's overhyped. It's not really going to mean that much, and everyone talks about it and doesn't know what they're talking about. Raise your hand. Okay. Who here thinks that I don't know what I'm talking about? Raise your hand. There's a larger subset of that. Okay, charming. What I do want to do is share my passion. It's good to know that actually most people do agree that data is going to actually have these transformative effects. And it's also really interesting to see that the people who are cynical, although it's great to be there because cynicism is healthy, particularly in this stage of the world that we are with fake news, etc., and a lot of hype, a lot of marketing, both sentiments are correct, and what I want to do is share my passion for all the changes that are taking place in data and in AI, tell you about what's going on from my vantage point as a non-expert in financial services, but someone who looks at it carefully in my peripheral vision, and then talk about how those changes might take place, what those implications of the changes are. And to do so, I want to start with a story, and the story is of a company, and the company is called Faircast. So several years ago, an American college professor had to go to his brother's wedding, and so he did what we all know to do, is he bought his ticket, his plane ticket, long before the date of departure. He was in Washington State, his brother was in LA. It's about a 3-hour flight. And so almost a year before he buys his ticket, saves some money, and the day of departure comes, he gets onto the plane, goes into his seat, and as they're taking off, the devil gets the better of him, and he asks the person next to him, how much did he pay? Snickers, because you know what's going to happen next. Turns out that the person paid considerably less, even though he bought his ticket just a few weeks before the day of departure. So it seems unfair. So this professor, Ornezioni, asks the person next to him, and then another, until there's this little hum in the back of the plane as the nutty professor is asking all these people what they've paid and sort of jotting it down. And everyone is willingly, confessing what they've paid because there's finally price transparency, albeit at 3,000 feet, in which we know that when we're crushed into the middle seat on economy class, that it's a pure commodity. No one seat is different than another seat. Yet we all know that we've all paid a different price. And now we can see it. And he finds out it doesn't look like there's any rhyme or reason for airfare madness. Okay, so he sketches out a little methodology on the back of a cocktail napkin. And the difference between a computer scientist and a normal person is that when you put your tray table up in the upright position and your seat back up, you depart the plane and get on with your life, but not computer scientists, he had sketched out a methodology in which he was going to scrape the internet, collect some data, and try to find out what would be the optimal way in which you would know whether to purchase a ticket right away from an online site or whether you're better off waiting. He calls his research project Hamlet. To buy or not to buy? That is the question. And so this is America, he gets venture capitalist funding, and so suddenly Farecast itself is airborne. It's saving lots of passengers lots of money, empowering consumers on whether they should buy their ticket right away or whether they're better off waiting because the price is likely to decline. But within a few years, he was crunching 75 billion flight price records, which represented every single seat on every single plane for all of American civil aviation for an entire year. Something that not even the GCHQ could have done a decade before a small startup was doing. He sold the company to Microsoft because this technique could be used for lots of different things, not just airplane seats, it could have been used cars, hotel rooms, right? Any product in which you have a commodity product, indistinguishable, in which you have a lot of data to learn from and a lot of price variation. But here's the thing, you know when they created electronic price records in the 1960s, never did they think. The airlines think that their data could be used against them to undercut their business model. And for all of us, you wouldn't have thought that the data could become its own separate, valuable entity or service that could empower consumers to save money. But that's what's happening. So what's going on? What are the features behind these trends? Well, the first one is technology. We can do things we couldn't do before. The second is the data itself. We didn't have the data before, but now we do. But the third, and maybe the most important, at least for where we are right now, is the mindset. This professor, Ornezioni, had a data mindset. He understood that he could actually extract a new form of value from that information if he had the technical know-how and he had the humility with which to ask it the right questions and yield back its insights and turn it into a product or service that other people could benefit from. That's what we mean when we say that the data is a new form of economic value, that it's a new raw material or a vital economic input. Now, you're hearing the term big data, data revolution, machine learning, artificial intelligence all the time, and it's really easy to become cynical or just completely confused about what it means. Leave aside the fact whether it applies in one context or another. We don't need to be religious about it. What we can really do is just think about it in terms of its qualities, of the features that it brings. And to demystify it and crystallize it, you can consider it like this. There are things we can do with a large body of data that we fundamentally cannot do when we're only working with smaller amounts of it. That the change in scale leads to a change in state. That a quantitative shift leads to a qualitative shift. Or if you prefer, more isn't just more. More is different. Okay. So how does it work? What is the technique behind it? Well, there's lots of different techniques in terms of how we interact with data to yield some of its insights. But the one I want to talk about now today, because I think it's just so important really for the next 2 decades of society, as well as business and as well as financial services, is the area of machine learning. Now, traditionally in AI, we try to give explicit instructions, like in computer science, a computer program, instructions, and the computer's job was just to do what we asked it to do. The area of machine learning inverts that somewhat. It does just the opposite. It says, hey, we don't know how to instruct a computer to do all the things we want it to do. Instead, we're going to give it its output. We're going to give it lots of data. And it's going to infer what the right answer is based on the information that we showed it. So it's sort of pattern recognition, pattern matching at an extremely elaborate scale. Now, that might be a little bit conceptual and hard to understand. So let me explain how the computer scientists got to that idea. And behind me is Arthur Samuel. And Arthur Samuel is a computer scientist in the 1950s at IBM. And what do you do if you're a computer scientist in the 1950s at IBM and you like to play checkers? I'm in Britain, drafts. But you write a computer program to play the machine in drafts, and that's what he does. So he writes the program, he plays the machine, and he wins. And he plays the machine and he wins. And he plays the machine and he wins. Excuse me, I've said that wrong. He plays the machine and he wins. That's right. And the reason why he's always winning is because the machine only knows what a legal move is. But Arthur Samuel knows something else. Arthur Samuel knows strategy. So he writes a small subprogram that operates in the background, that after every board configuration, it calculates whether the new board is likely to lead to a winning board versus a losing board. He plays it again, and Arthur Samuel still wins. He plays it again, and he still wins. Okay. And then Arthur Samuel leaves the machine to play itself. The machine plays itself. It collects more data. It collects more data. It increases the accuracy of its predictions. And then Arthur Samuel returns to the machine, and then he loses. And he plays, and he loses, and he plays, and he loses. And Arthur Samuel has created a machine that's exceeded his abilities in a task that he taught it. And this idea of machine learning is going absolutely everywhere. Now, one place where we know it's gone has been famously in Google DeepMind's AlphaGo and then AlphaZero program. It was a much more elaborate method of artificial intelligence called deep learning, but the fundamental principle was largely the same: learning based on large bodies of data. Now, we use artificial intelligence and machine learning absolutely every day, even if we're not aware of it. If I were to Google the name of one of the organizers of today's conference, and I mistype the last name, Barkley, and I spell it with an E instead of the A, how did Google know? Who at Google is responsible for knowing all of the names of the broadcasters and financial journalists who think about financial probity in Britain and around the world? Well, there's no one at Google who gets a fax machine and then keys it into the system. It's a machine learning algorithm. You can see that in, looks like half a second. Google has scoured the entire global internet. It's come back with about 600,000 results. And sure enough, it has identified that this word quadruplicate of Liz Barkley talk money is far more common when Barkley is spelled with a and not with the E. So it's actually corrected it for me. And of course, everything I do on this platform is a signal for something else. So if actually, this is the global internet, there's lots of E's, there's lots of instances with it misspelled. Of course, that's just how the internet is, it's just a cesspool of typos. However, you can see that if I click on it with the E, search instead for, it's a signal for Google. If I stay on that page, it knows that I don't go back. If I go back and do a variant of those 4 keywords, it knows that I didn't get what I wanted. And if everyone's clicking on maybe the 4th or 5th listing, it will know to list it up even further. It's a machine learning algorithm. It learns over time based on what is happening on the platform. It's because of machine learning that we have self-driving cars, that we have computer translation that's not so laughable. Speech recognition actually works now. Research recently at Harvard and Stanford wanted to see if a machine learning algorithm could perform as well as a human pathologist in diagnosing cases of severe cancer. They uploaded lots of cases, lots of biopsies, and patient survival rates, and then they let the algorithm do its job. And sure enough, it was able to work, and the algorithm did perform as well as a human pathologist. In fact, there was a rub. The algorithm was able to identify the 11 telltale traits that best predict cancer. The medical literature only knew of 8 of them. 3 of the things that the algorithm spotted, human practitioners didn't know to look for. It was invisible to the human eye, and it was spotted by AI. So this has been a story about hospitals, and if it's a story about hospitals, it's a story about people. But it's not a story about hospitals, and it's not a story about people. It's about something else, something a lot bigger. It's about thinking of the world in an entirely new way. Every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every sales transaction, every flight that takes off, thinking about the world as a platform for the collection and the analysis of data. So what does this mean for financial services? Okay. Well, let's think about a couple of use cases. In the first instance, we can do better credit scoring of individuals who are interacting with the financial services industry. And if we do that, maybe we can get better loans at better rates. The person behind me is Douglas Merrill, and he's the former chief technology officer of Google. And one day he got a call from his sister, who was deeply in debt because she has taken out a $125 loan because she needed something before her check came in. And it was just a payday loan, and the lending interest rate was 25%, and it just rolled over, and she had a problem. And you can imagine there's a little bit of a disparity here because he's sort of a winner in Silicon Valley, and she wasn't. And it was a real bit of a crisis. And he says, well, why didn't you ask me for money? It's like, why did you have to go through them to get the loan? She says, well, I'm sort of invisible to the traditional financial services industry because I'm not on the records. They can't actually give me a loan. These were the only people who were willing to give me a loan. So what he did is he created a company called Zest Finance, realizing that if he could actually find ways to score individuals who are otherwise excluded from the traditional top-tier financial services industry, and he could offer them rates that weren't so exorbitant, with other financial institutions, because he's got better scoring methods through artificial intelligence, he could actually enfranchise people and support them in ways that they couldn't be supported before by the traditional lenders, even at the top tier, or worse, at the bottom tier. And so that's what he's doing, and he's doing it very well. The next is in terms of financial probity. How would that work in a world of AI, digital platforms, and data? Well, we can code into our systems some of our values and then optimize those values based on what's actually happening on those platforms. And that's exactly what's happening right now with Monzo, which is really interesting, although they're not the only ones. There's lots of other organizations that can do it. The first thing is you get a sort of form of transparency of your financial transactions right at the time of purchase. Secondly, it's collected so you can actually, and aggregated so you can actually get a better sense of where you're spending money. Is it on cigarettes and booze, or is it on, on just daily necessities? And so you can that might be a little bit too blunt, but you could imagine what you consider daily necessities. Maybe you're overspending here and not there. But then it becomes really interesting when you add a little veneer of behavioral economics and nudges. Maybe if you put certain forms of spending in different colors, say red or green, the green suggesting that this is really good, the red is, hey, watch out, maybe you want to spend less of this. Maybe you can learn new things. And in fact, if you find that it works, you do more of that. And if you find out that these color codings or these little alerts to say, almost like little alarms saying, hey, do you really need this? You bought it recently, maybe defer the spending. If it doesn't work and just causes anxiety of people, you try something else. But these are things we never could know before. And now we can because we're on a digital platform, and we can actually see in real time or quasi-real time the effectiveness of these interventions to try to support people so they handle their money better. And then finally, there's the issue of robo-advice. Sure, we've heard a lot about it. Yes, it has the great potential to expand the market. And secondly, it can give people, in theory, the same high-quality advice that rich people get now at the lower price point for an almost invisible price point because it's done by an algorithm. That's true. And let's hope that it works. I think we're still in the first inning of robo-advice. I think there's a long way to go, and we're going to improve those systems. But the key thing is, if we want to trust the algorithm alone, we are in big trouble. Because people are going to need to interact with people, and it's going to be far more powerful for financial planners and advisors and individuals who work with people, particularly vulnerable people in financial situations, to be empowered and have this sort of as a superpower, this tool of robo-advice, and then become better at what they do, interacting with people, rather than just presuming that we can wash our hands from it and tell someone, hey, go online or download this app and be gone. I just don't think it's going to work that way. I think it's going to be a marriage of people and the technology, and that's what's going to actually move the needle in terms of improving performance for people, particularly vulnerable people in financial situations. So what are the risks of all of these technologies and techniques? There are several, of course, and the most is going to be privacy. Privacy has been a serious problem in all domains of society because these techniques can actually extract new sort of insights, ones that we thought were hidden because it infers our behavior rather than actually knows for sure what it is, but it might infer our behavior better than ever before. So we might not explicitly say that we are a male, but it can tell if we're male or female based on what we're doing. Likewise, we might not be suggesting that we might be in a vulnerable situation in terms of financial services, but it might infer, based on all of our patterns of behavior, that in fact we're going to be a really bad credit. And it might deny us a loan based on that. Should we allow that? Even if the algorithm works, maybe we want to interject the regulatory requirement of free will and moral choice into the system. Or maybe we want to say, society-wise, we don't, but here's what we want to do to support people and help people when we see on these platforms that they're going down in a bad route. Right? These are choices that society has to make. The next is bias. These algorithms never work alone and sort of devoid of the social context that they're in, and particularly for people in financial services and for the people who don't have a lot of money, this is going to be a critical issue because we don't want to unfairly discriminate people, even if we don't know, even if we can say that it's simply an algorithm and it's not overt discrimination, the algorithm and the output of it could necessarily still be discriminatory. So we need to be on guard to make sure that doesn't happen. And the third and most important is a term that I'll call dataism. And it's this idea that although we need to embrace data and AI and use it for all the ways that we can learn new things and optimize behaviors and extract new forms of value that can help people, we need to remember that the data is always limited. The data is only a representation of reality. It's not the real thing, in the same way that a map is not territory. So let's use it, but let's not use it if it comes at the expense of our values, of our sense of fairness, of our sense of justice, or our common sense. So what's the future going to look like? In the past, we've seen huge inequalities, and financial services has sadly been one of the ways in which those inequalities have been exacerbated. I would hope that the industry is going to use these new tools to narrow those gaps, and I think that they will. And I think that all of you here can have a role to play by learning about data and incorporating it into your work. Thanks a lot. Now, I've been asked to stick around and answer some questions. So you've got target practice. Go for it. Bring it on. I was also told that if you didn't have enough questions, I was going to waive red meat by challenging you, but I see there's already one question. Yeah. There's a mic coming as well.
The AI applications in financial services, but I found, based on my experience, the quality of the data is really important for the machine learning, and also for me that it is the competition based on the experiences, how to adjust the parameters in the modeling. So how do you think we can improve the data quality in the financial services? Because it's case by case, like different sectors, they have different formats, and I think it's quite broadly to talk. It will help us to improve our data work. Yeah.
It's a great question, and I don't want to get technical. So the first is going to be through regulation, of course, right? When you have open banking rules in which the data has to be shared and it's possible to go to third parties, you have a requirement that the data is clean enough that what you're sending is of a certain quality. So regulation is one way, right? The next, though, is it's clear that companies have to invest in their foundations, in their data, that what they're getting is clean and is good and is usable. As data becomes more valuable, I think that those investments will be made. Right now, you'd be absolutely horrified to realize just how badly companies are mistreating their data. They're not making the necessary investments, and most data is really quite poor in companies. If I had to score it like on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being very clean data, I'd say people are hitting around 65. Now think about that. That's sort of a failing grade if you're in elementary school, right? So. And that's pretty much everywhere. I mean, places like Goldman Sachs and top-tier hedge funds, no, they've got great data. But this is talking about travel companies, media publishers, et cetera. So that investment will have to be made. However, some of these techniques do fine even if you don't have clean data, because the signal is so unmissable once you start looking for it. So you don't In some instances, you want clean data, but you don't necessarily need it. It depends on what your application is, what you're trying to get out of that information. I'm going to start asking them questions. So let's go for it. Oh, there's one more. Oh, hey. Hello. There's a mic coming around.
David Alexander from Midex CSE. Ken and I have been on many trains to Europe, backwards and forwards, talking about data for what seems like a lifetime.
Exactly.
What do you think's happened in the last 11 years to move the needle on this subject? You've been writing and talking about it, but what's changed?
Oh, yeah. There's been the great question, yeah, for the last 11 years. There's been two huge revolutions, right? 11 years ago, data was sort of just a byproduct of what you did as a business. And you rarely sort of went back into it and used it for its secondary value, right? And then what happened was, if you will, just the big data revolution, I'll say, of between, well, in Silicon Valley, and Google, it was around 2002, so it was early days, right? But for everyone else, it was really around 2010 that companies understood that there was this like faircast, this secondary value of data. But what was happening then was basically just statistics. It was statistics, but now companies could do it and startups could furnish that, right? But now I'll be geeky. But that was a logistical regression. That was just Bayesian stats. It wasn't being done in business before, but it was stuff that was done 50 years before, right? These are techniques that in some cases were 100 years before. Not done in business, done in the sciences. And then something else happened. Between basically 2010 and basically 2012 was maybe the starting pistol of it, machine learning. This technique of machine learning didn't really work. I mean, so Arthur Samuel got up the field with it. It worked in checkers because you've got a board, it's a bounded game, it's a closed loop system, and you know what winning is and you know what losing is. Use real world data and try to say, for example, understand cancer. Couldn't do it for two reasons. Your processors were just way too slow. Your memory, three reasons. Memory was too expensive, so that was the Silicon Revolution. But most importantly, you didn't have the data. You needed more data. That was hence the idea of big data, right? It wasn't just bullshit. There was a real reason why we called it big data. That was a simplification of the machine learning story. And once machine learning hit, and the big change was 2012, basically 3 foundational papers all around deep learning, this technique that then was incorporated by AlphaGo, whoosh, we're off. We're going to spend the next 20 years as a society taking every single problem we have, turning it into a prediction problem, and then solving it through these layers of inferences through deep learning or through machine learning, through AI. That's why when people are talking about AI, saying this is as important as electricity or computing, they're not lying. They're telling the truth. We can finally do something that we never could do before, and it is going to completely transform everything we do because the cost point is just so friggin' low. It's like the cell phones the cell phone that's in your pocket right now used to cost millions of bucks only about maybe 2 decades ago. And it's in your pocket. That same thing is going to happen. And everything that we interact with will have, if you will, this veneer of intelligence because it'll be learning from its environment and learning from you from the data. And I'm just getting started. I'm going to talk for the next 2 hours about this.
Do you allow follow-ups?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I also want challenging questions. So after David, because these are softballs, right? I'm having a lot of fun here.
This is the last one.
So let's go for a challenging question. Who here thinks that everything that I've said is actually wrong? That's more fun. I see there's someone waving his hand here. And now there's like 8 hands up. Okay, great. There's 30. Exactly. Exactly. We've got one more question. So yeah, go for it.
Hello. It's Chris Mythe from Leeds Credit Union. I will challenge you on the way that data will, rather than include, will exclude. My fear is that if there's a different audience in this room of a different type of financial organizations, they would be thinking about how can we use data to get rid of the customers that are not profitable for us. And therefore, I would predict, and you can correct me, that I would see more redlining for low income and financially excluded people through data than we can see now. And a consequence for my type of organisation means that those people are even more thrust at organisations like credit unions and have to, because we've got that social will to do so, try and deal with those even more redlined and marginalised peoples, because the big organisations are more successful in rejecting them through your data.
Okay, good question. Yeah, great. Good. So you might be right, okay? There's two answers to it. The first one is, well, public policy will probably intervene and make redlining illegal. Redlining obviously comes from the term in which a department store actually physically took, I forgot which one, but you can Google it and find out, in the United States, they took a red line and they circled an area in which they wouldn't give credit to the customers who were going in from that area, from that postal code, because they felt that they were bad borrowers. It was also a proxy for race, as you can imagine. But even if it wasn't, it was still discriminatory because it took them as a class based on the characteristic of their postal code and not of who they were. That was the term redlining, but the reason why we know the term redlining is because it was deemed illegal in the United States. It's illegal in most democracies, in places with responsible financial regulation. So on its and the U.S. law, I don't know British law, but I could imagine it'd be very similar. U.S. law is incredibly clear, and there's been the Obama administration, when we had an administration that dealt with evidence, issued reports based on big data in the last few years, in which they reiterated what the law says, and what the law says is that you don't have to, if you have the motive of not being discriminatory, but the output of what you've done has a discriminatory element, you're liable. It doesn't matter if you had not intended to be discriminatory. If what happened was discriminatory, you're liable. So regulation will come in, but that's not good enough, of course. The second one is I do think that you will see society cleave into the super haves, who are going to use these techniques to supercharge their wealth and go far further than other people. We could say that maybe we need a better tax policy, et cetera, to remedy that, but I wouldn't hold my breath. That's certainly going to happen. However, I think credit unions like yours and others are going to be able to use this technique then to serve those other people, and going to serve them in a way that would still be better. I'm optimistic. And the reason why is that these tools don't have a life of their own. They're not really like Terminator robots that you wind them up and they go. They rely on human beings to actually determine how they're applied and what happens with them. And if there are people like yourselves who care about servicing people in financial difficulties, then you can use these tools and be even more effective than you could before. That's, again, a belief. I don't have any facts, but we'll see how it unfolds.
Okay. Kenneth Cukier, thank you so much. We could have spoken for another 2 hours, as you say,
yeah.
and you can see from the number of questions we haven't had time to answer, that's certainly been the case. It's been stimulating, it's been fascinating. We'd love to talk to you again in 11 years' time and see where we are
back.
about that. So hopefully,
Thanks a lot.
we'll see you before then.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Thanks.
Got a note here. Right, okay. Okay. Wow, okay. So I've got a note here. This is breaking news straight from the people who are on the Poverty Premium session at 1420. This is just the panelists, by the way. Could you go to the staircase, please? Not that you've been banished from the session, but you need microphones on. So I've been asked to pass you that note there. They are Lucy Russell, I think it's Sarah Davies. Apologies, I'm just trying to read the handwriting here. Ian Fiddleman, thank you. And first, I can read the first one. It's Dan from Energy UK. Please forgive the informality there. But if you are in the room, please, would you mind heading to the staircase and then we can pop some microphones on you. Those sessions will be starting in about 15 minutes or so. But ahead of that, we have got our breaking report session. So I'd like to invite to the stage our three presenters for that one. They are Malcolm Goodrum from the Talk Debt campaign, Chris Fitch from the Money Advice Trust, and also Alistair Chisholm from PayPlan. Welcome to you all. That's the way to make an entrance. Malcolm, would you like to kick off?
Okay, well, hopefully everyone can hear me. So, hello, I'm going to stand up if that's okay. Yeah, my name's Malcolm Gooderham, and I'm the coordinator of the Talk Debt campaign. Firstly, a quick thank you to Liz Barkley for organising a fantastic conference today and for supporting the campaign as well. So, what is the campaign? What is Talk Debt? You're Not Alone. Basically, it's a coalition, a multi-stakeholder coalition that's come together to shine a light on the very, very powerful social taboo that dissuades people from talking about money, and in particular talking about debt. The campaign has some very leading organisations, both from the private sector and from the money advice sector, including, but not exclusively, Experian, Lowell, Plum and Monzo, and RBS, and also Money Advice Service, Money Advice Trust, and Step Change. We've been looking at the powerful social taboo that is really trapping too many people in debt in this country. And it's often said in the UK that we have three taboos, if you like. One, religion, another one is sex, and another one is politics. And I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of those falling away. When you think about Brexit and Love Island, you can't get enough of those. Although I'm not sure you want to confuse two of those. The idea of the cabinet on Love Island, I don't think we're quite ready for that. But on a serious note, what we do need to do is to encourage people to be more comfortable in talking about their personal finances, and to help kick off the campaign. To organisations, Experian and the National Deadline, collaborated on a piece of work which has many interesting component parts, but the one I want to pull out today very quickly are the numbers and the data that they found, which highlights why people don't come forward and don't speak up. So the top three reasons that they found were, number one, stress, number two, the social taboo, i.e. people were too embarrassed, and number three, that people had a lack of awareness about the debt services that were freely available. So each of those tells its own story. Each of those needs significant focus to help address some of the problems that we're discussing here today. And the campaign will be very much focused on the tackling of the social taboo and engaging various initiatives to try and increase self-confidence on the issue of money. So if anybody's interested and anyone has any ideas and they want to get involved, then obviously come and see me afterwards. If you'd like a copy of the report, I'd recommend you go to the Money Advice Trust National Deadline stand in the exhibition hall, and you can collect a copy there. Or alternatively, obviously, you can email as well. So thank you very much, and hopefully some of you will engage with us as the year goes on. Thank you.
Malcolm, thanks so much for that. Chris, over to you.
It's like the inaugural meeting of Three White Men with Glasses Support Club. It's nice to be here. So I'll give you back this mic and use this one here. So we're launching, is this mic on? Brilliant. So we're launching a guide around debt advice and vulnerability. Old news to debt advisors. Been dealing with it before it was called vulnerability. So what's new? Well, what's new is we try to give a voice. We've done so much work with financial services in the past at the Personal Finance Research Centre and Money Advice Trust around vulnerability. We were really keen to try and balance that up to see what was happening in the advice sector. So very luckily and very kindly, 1,500 of you from 400 different organisations, if you work in debt advice, participated to try and do kind of four things. One is to kind of profile the debt advice landscape. So it gives us something in addition to the supply survey that many of you will be involved in, give you a different perspective on it, to try and understand the experience of delivering debt advice in resource-limited, difficult circumstances with a client base of increasing needs during a period of austerity, difficulty, and also the Wyman recommendations. To thirdly, identify And I'm trying to read it. I can't read it. My glasses are obviously not good enough. We did something else around identification. It was to try and identify what was going on in relation to kind of the strategies that were put into place, and to think about some of the tools. Researchers are really bad at kind of describing problems and then not providing any solutions. So we tried to provide some tools. And really, it was to give you a set of data. Unlike other bits of benchmarking you might have come across, we've published absolutely everything in data tables as well as the main report. And many thanks to kind of Jamie Evans, who led this, Sharon Collard, Colin Trend, and of course to the Money Advice Service for funding it, and our partners as well. There are 4 elements to it. There's the debt advice landscape, which profiles what's happening in debt advice, and you've got some stats up there. The second element is around day-to-day challenges, where we describe what people are encountering on the advice front line, and we do break things down. We are by fee, by free, by kind of volunteers, by paid, by qualifications, by different sizes of organisations, and to give a sense of kind of what's happening day to day and provide you some tools. Thirdly, to give you some focus support, some guidance around 3 issues: mental health. Partners at Money and Mental Health helped immensely with that. To also look around suicide prevention, which is a very big issue at the moment. But one of the big areas that we looked at as well was gambling and other addictions. And there's a large section in the report around advisors' experiences of working with clients with kind of a deficit budgets, with gambling addiction, and how we can actually address that in frontline settings. And we're very grateful for everyone that participated. And one of the big calls in the piece of research is for MALG, in the same way that it consolidated the discussion around mental health with its guidelines from 2007, 2009, 2014, to consider doing something around gambling addiction. Because I think it's such a timely issue. We're seeing so much work taking place at the moment, but it needs a consolidated and agreed voice on how to take this forward. And then finally, we looked at wider policy challenges. You know, if you're an advisor, you would ask advisors about policy, and you know, away they go, and they will give you kind of a ream after ream of qualitative data. We looked there very much at a range of issues, but one of them was around digitisation, use of digital channels, and asked advisors to weigh up on balance, as you can see from the screen there, about some of the positives and negatives of working with people in vulnerable situations. So it's available from the Money Advice Trust stall. It's from pfrc.brist.ac.uk. And if you are involved in debt advice, thank you very, very much for sharing your experience and your voice. Thanks.
Chris, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And Alistair, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm launching a report today called Keeping Court for the Last Resort, which will be available on the Institute of Money Advisors and Pay Plan website after this conference, and also an open letter to government. So a year ago at the MAL conference, we launched the Pay Plan Institute of Money Advisors campaign around council tax imprisonment. And that's because we think that people shouldn't be sent to prison because they can't pay a bill. Imprisonment should be kept for crime, not civil debts. Thank you, MAL, for that opportunity. And we've had some good news about that a year on. The Welsh Government have announced that they're no longer going to allow the imprisonment of people who have got council tax debt in Welsh from April. So that's fantastic news. The campaign continues in England, and it raises some new questions for us, which I'm going to address today. So councils certainly have a hard job. Money is very tight in local authorities, and the council tax system was introduced in a hurry to replace poll tax. It's very difficult to manage, and we're not here to have an unreasonable pop at councils. But we are really in the middle of a big council tax debt crisis. There's £3.3 billion of unpaid council tax in England and Wales, £1 billion of it added last year. In 2013, the government issued guidance saying that councils should only use court as a last resort when people have council tax debt. And that very year, the number of people taken to court by councils went up by 50%. So that guidance is very widely ignored. And in fact, the liability for order for council tax debt is now the most commonly issued court order in England and Wales. Court action adds massive stress to people, but it's also a turning point in the council tax collections process, because at that point, councils often say, you've had your 2 months or your 3 months for forbearance, it's too late, and we're going to come down hard on you now. So we want to try and unpick the rapid escalation of council tax debts, and we've just uncovered some figures, by the way, that show that in 2016, 3.1 million people were taken to court for council tax debt. So we really are in the middle of a kind of tsunami of debt litigation. What we want to do is kind of de-escalate that, find ways of helping people to pay that, and find kind of simple changes that government can make. And there's one really crass anomaly that came up in the council tax rules, and that is, if you're behind with your water bill, your gas bill, your electricity bill, if you owe money to a privatised utility company, in other words, and you want to pay money through your means-tested benefits, you can do so. If you want to pay your council tax benefit in the same way, the council has to take you to court first. That seems to us to be a very unreasonable anomaly. So in the campaign today, we're just calling for two things. One is for the government to review the way that debts are collected through the benefit system so that people can afford the payments they're asked to make. And two, change the rules so that if people want to, they can voluntarily avoid being taken to court and pay their council tax debt through their benefits. So please pick up a copy of the open letter. I think Helen is at the back there and is going to give it out on the way out. Please look out for our report, Keeping Court for the Last Resort, and thank you very much.
Asta, thank you. Thank you to all three of our speakers, because you've packed a huge amount of information there into a very short period of time indeed, and stimulated us all to start thinking and get moving as well. So our huge appreciation for those. It's now time for our next breakout session, which is about to start in just a few minutes' time. Of course, details are on your badge, but if you need a reminder, they're up there as well. After that breakout session, we've got a refreshment break, another chance to swap ideas, have a cup of coffee, bit of networking, and then the final breakout session will start at 3:40 this afternoon. And just in case you were thinking of sneaking off then and having an early finish, we're going to have Martin Lewis back up here at 4:30, when we'll be asking him exactly what should be chucked out when it comes to talking about financial capability. So see you back there then. Thank you.